He laughed across the table, his words sharp enough to shatter the silence. Grandma's brain is garbage. It was my grandson's voice, the boy I once rocked to sleep, now spitting cruelty at 74 years of my life. But I didn't flinch. I closed the ledger, turned the page, and rewrote my legacy. By dawn, Dylan was cut out forever, and Maya's future was sealed with millions. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The Carter dining table had once been a place of birthdays and Sunday roasts, polished oak glowing under the soft light of the chandelier. But tonight, the atmosphere was brittle, the kind of air that crackled with tension before a storm. Elaine Carter sat at the head, as she always had since her husband's passing, her silver hair pinned neatly, her posture graceful despite the weight of 74 years. She had cooked the roast herself, her hands still precise from decades of balancing ledgers as a CPA, but the meal was already poisoned by her grandson's laughter. Dylan leaned back in his chair, designer watch flashing as he swirled wine in a crystal glass he hadn't bought. At 23, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never faced consequence, his voice rising louder than anyone else's in the room. He looked across the table at his grandmother, eyes narrowing with smug amusement. "Grandma's brain is already garbage," he said, smirking as if he'd told a clever joke. "She probably won't even remember this dinner tomorrow." The words fell like a slap. Maya froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, her knuckles whitening around the handle. She was only 21, still wearing the tired cardigan she'd pulled over her work uniform before rushing to dinner. Her eyes darted from Dylan to Elaine, searching her grandmother's face for a reaction. "Don't talk to her like that," Maya said softly, her voice small but trembling with anger. "You don't know what you're saying." Dylan snorted, raising his glass as if to toast. "Relax, Maya. I'm just telling the truth. Everyone knows she's not as sharp as she used to be." Elaine's lips pressed together, but her eyes didn't flinch. She set her fork down gently on the edge of her plate, her movements deliberate, controlled. Years of accountancy had trained her to keep her composure under pressure, and decades of life had taught her that silence often spoke louder than shouting. Across the table, Linda Perez's chair scraped back slightly. Elaine's oldest friend had been invited for the evening, partly to soften the family tension, though nothing could blunt Dylan's arrogance. Linda's sharp eyes cut across the table, locking on the young man with a glare honed from years as a paralegal. She leaned toward Elaine, her voice pitched just enough for her to hear. "He just buried himself," Linda murmured. Elaine's gaze remained steady, her chin lifting slightly. "He thinks I'm weak," she said under her breath, her tone calm, almost detached. "I'll prove him wrong." Dylan, oblivious, tipped back the rest of his wine and laughed again, basking in the silence he mistook for surrender. The rest of the meal passed in brittle fragments. Maya pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone, while Dylan scrolled on his phone, half engaged, muttering about parties and cars. Elaine carried the conversation with polite nods, but her mind was already elsewhere, turning, calculating, quietly writing numbers in columns only she could see. When the plates were cleared and the house finally emptied of voices, Elaine retreated to her bedroom. The desert night pressed against the windows, cicadas humming outside in the Phoenix heat. She opened her closet and pulled down a heavy leather binder from the top shelf. Its spine creaked as she carried it to her desk, the weight of it more than paper. It was her life's record, her security, her weapon. She laid it open, page by page, property deeds in her sole name, investment portfolios she had nurtured across decades, savings accounts that had swelled from discipline and sacrifice. She traced her finger across her husband's old signature on their first mortgage, then her own alone on the document that had paid it off. Dylan had never worked a day for this. Maya, meanwhile, was working double shifts just to keep tuition paid. Elaine adjusted her glasses, her eyes hardening with each line of ink. Dylan's insult replayed in her ears, sharper now in the solitude of her room. Garbage, brain garbage. He thought her mind was slipping, but tonight, she felt sharper than she had in years. She closed the binder with a firm snap, the sound echoing in the stillness of the room. Her reflection in the darkened window looked back at her, lined with age but steady with resolve. Tomorrow would not be about mourning insults. Tomorrow would be about rewriting her legacy. The next morning dawned clear and hot, sunlight spilling through the blinds in long golden stripes across Elaine's desk. The binder from last night still sat there, heavy and waiting, its presence like an unspoken challenge. Elaine poured herself a cup of black coffee, the kind she'd been brewing the same way for 50 years, and settled into the chair she had once used to balance clients' accounts. The tools of her trade had changed, but the discipline remained. She opened the binder and began again, this time slower, methodical, as if she were auditing her own life. Page after page revealed the results of decades of diligence. 2 properties, her desert home and a modest rental in Tempe, a balanced portfolio of blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds she had rolled over through 5 recessions, savings accounts layered like sediment, each deposit a quiet rebellion against hardship. The totals stacked up in neat columns, more than enough to keep her comfortable for the rest of her days, more than enough to secure someone else's future, too. Her hand lingered over the page listing her investments. The numbers were clean, but the story behind them was anything but. Each line represented sacrifice, nights spent hunched over ledgers when she could have gone dancing, coupons clipped at the kitchen table until her scissors left ridges on her fingers, years of turning down vacations so tuition and mortgages could be paid without debt. Dylan had never seen any of it. He had grown up assuming money was air, always there, invisible, taken for granted. At 23, he had not kept a single job longer than a season. Every car he drove, every rent check covered, had come from family money. He never asked how the balance sheet was sustained, he only knew how to spend it. Elaine's jaw tightened as she turned to the next section, the comparison more glaring than the ink on the page. Maya's name was scribbled in the margins of bills Elaine had quietly covered, tuition payments she had topped off when tips from Maya's waitressing job came up short, bookstore receipts tucked beside proof of scholarships. Elaine pictured her granddaughter's tired eyes after back-to-back shifts, still smiling, still studying, never once asking for more than help with the occasional bus fare. 2 grandchildren, one living as if life owed him everything, the other working for every breath of independence she could carve out. Linda's voice broke into her thoughts as she bustled through the back door without knocking, the same way she had for 40 years. She set a bag of bagels on the counter and leaned against the doorframe, her sharp eyes already zeroing in on the open binder. "Let me guess," Linda said, peeling off her sunglasses. "Column after column of what you built, and not a single dime he's lifted a finger for." Elaine gave a slow nod, adjusting her glasses as she slid a page toward her friend. "Millions, Linda. And he acts as though it was delivered on his birthday with a bow." Linda scanned the figures and whistled low. One deserves, one doesn't. Not hard math, even for someone who calls brains garbage. Elaine closed the binder gently, her hand resting on the leather cover as if sealing a verdict. Time to balance the books. For a long moment the 2 women sat in silence, the cicadas humming outside, the desert heat beginning to shimmer through the window. Elaine felt the weight of her decision harden into resolve, her old instincts kicking in. The calm of a CPA about to make a decisive adjustment. She reached for the phone on the desk, her fingers steady. She flipped through her address book until she found the number written in her late husband's precise hand. Robert Lane, estate plan. A man she had trusted once to close a client's complicated case, meticulous to the point of surgical. Her finger hovered over the digits for just a beat. Dylan's mocking words replayed again in her ears, cruel and careless. Maya's soft voice rose against it, trembling but firm. "Don't talk to her like that." Elaine pressed the buttons deliberately, each tone a strike of the gavel. The line rang, and then a measured voice answered on the other end. "Robert Lane." Elaine straightened, her voice crisp, unshaken. "This is Elaine Carter. I believe it's time we reviewed my will." Robert Lane's office overlooked the sprawl of downtown Phoenix, glass towers gleaming in the desert sun like sentinels of order and permanence. Inside, however, the atmosphere was cooler, steadier. Mahogany shelves lined with casebooks, framed degrees, and a single cactus in the corner that had somehow survived decades of dry neglect. Robert himself sat at the head of a long table, silver hair neatly combed, his glasses perched halfway down his nose as he flipped through Elaine's estate binder with the precision of a surgeon. Elaine sat opposite him, posture straight, her hands folded on the polished. She had worn her navy blazer, the one she used to wear to tax audits, a subtle reminder that numbers and rules were her language. Linda occupied the chair beside her, notepad already open, pen poised like she was back at her paralegal desk. Robert cleared his throat, tapping one page with the end of his pen. Mrs. Carter, your estate is significant. 2 properties, investments, liquid account. As it stands, your grandson is primary beneficiary, your granddaughter secondary. Elaine's lips curved faintly, not in amusement, but in resolve. Then let's correct the ledger. Remove Dylan, leave everything to Maya. Robert looked up, studying her face for hesitation. That's no small change. Once filed, it will set off alarms if he tries to contest. Are you prepared for the fight that may follow? Elaine adjusted her glasses, the light catching the steel in her eyes. Garbage doesn't inherit. Linda smirked, jotting the words into her notes as if they belonged in legal precedent. Robert nodded once, briskly, and pulled a new packet of papers from his briefcase. Then we'll formalize an irrevocable trust. That way, it cannot be challenged. No guardianship tricks, no last-minute petitions. Everything will transfer directly to Maya, airtight. The sound of pages sliding across the table seemed to echo louder than it should. Elaine picked up the pen laid neatly before her and began signing with slow, deliberate strokes. Each signature was a cut, each set of initials a boundary drawn in ink. By the time she capped the pen, Dylan Carter no longer existed in her estate. Maya did not know it yet, but she had just become heir to millions. Linda leaned forward, snapping her notary seal into place with the satisfaction of a verdict. The embossed impression bit into the paper, leaving behind a raised symbol of finality. Witnessed and locked, she said, her voice sharp with satisfaction. Robert gathered the signed pages, sliding them into a secure folder. It's done. The documents will be filed by end of day, legally binding, beyond dispute. He closed the folder with a soft thud, then folded his hands. Mrs. Carter, you've built something extraordinary. You've also just sent a message your grandson will not mistake. Elaine rose from her chair, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. He mistook silence for weakness. Now, he'll mistake the ground giving way beneath him. The women left the office together, stepping into the blazing heat of the afternoon. The sun caught the edges of the glass towers, throwing shards of light across the sidewalk. Elaine squinted against it, but she didn't slow her step. Across town, at that very moment, Dylan Carter was sprawled on the leather couch of his apartment, the television blaring sports highlights while he scrolled lazily through his phone. A half-eaten pizza box sat on the coffee table, beer bottles clustered like trophies. On his social media feed, he typed out a post for all to see. Can't wait till Grandma kicks it. Easy street for me. Trust fund life incoming. His friends replied with emojis, cheers, $sign, laughing faces. Dylan grinned, stretching out like a king on a throne he believed unshakable. He had no idea that, miles away, his kingdom had already been erased with ink and seal. Back in Elaine's car, Linda buckled her seatbelt and gave her friend a sidelong glance. You realize, don't you, that he'll come sniffing around once he feels the walls closing in? Elaine's expression didn't waver. She looked out at the shimmering desert horizon, her voice steady as bedrock. Let him. Every page he pushes against is another wall waiting to fall on him. The engine started, the air conditioning humming to life. Elaine leaned back, her binders secured on the seat beside her, the folder of signed documents tucked safely inside. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Not because she had less to carry, but because she had finally set the weight where it belonged. And somewhere across town, Dylan Carter laughed with his friends, still bragging about future money, unaware that his future had already been stolen by the very mind he had mocked. Elaine heard him before she saw him, the thud of sneakers against her front porch, the impatient slam of the screen door, the sharp scent of his cologne wafting into the hall like an invasion. Dylan didn't bother with greetings. He never did. He stormed into the living room where Elaine sat at her writing desk, her binder closed neatly beside her, the afternoon sun washing the carpet in a soft amber glow. "Grandma," he said sharply, dropping onto the couch with a careless sprawl. "I need money." Elaine turned her head slowly, her expression placid, almost curious. "Do you now?" Dylan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his phone glowing in his hand. "Not a lot." just an advance. From what's coming to me. Think of it like early distribution. No point letting it sit when you're not even using it. Elaine folded her hands in her lap, her voice even. I've never considered an inheritance a credit line, Dylan. He laughed once, the sound brittle. Don't play coy. We both know the money's mine someday. You can either help me now or wait until... He paused, letting the implication hang like smoke. Elaine's face remained still. You'll have to wait. Dylan's smirk faltered, frustration flashing in his eyes. He sat back, gesturing with his phone like a weapon. You won't even remember saying that in a week. You forget things all the time. Everyone sees it. I'm just trying to be practical. The words stung, but Elaine let them pass over her without a ripple. She reached for her glasses, adjusted them, and returned her gaze to him with quiet composure. If memory is the issue, perhaps I should have it measured properly. Dylan rolled his eyes. What, like a test? Please, doctors will say whatever you pay them to. Elaine stood, her movements unhurried, and crossed the room toward the hall phone. I'll schedule an evaluation. Not for you. For me. He blinked at her, momentarily wrong-footed, before his arrogance snapped back into place. Go ahead. Doesn't change the fact that the clock's ticking. Elaine lifted the receiver and dialed, her back to him. What it changes, she said, her tone sharp enough to still the room, is the record. Records matter more than noise. 2 weeks later, she sat in a crisp white office smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A neurologist guided her through a battery of tests. Memory recall, word associations, puzzles timed against the clock. Elaine moved through each with the same calm focus she once brought to balancing corporate ledgers. When she was done, she sat back, her palms resting lightly on her knees, her eyes steady. The doctor smiled, tapping his pen against the chart. Mrs. Carter, you performed exceptionally. Your cognitive health is not only stable, but impressive for your age. No signs of decline. Elaine inclined her head, a small nod of acknowledgement, but inside she felt something ignite. The insult Dylan had hurled, garbage brain, now sat beside the doctor's crisp words like 2 entries in a ledger, one a lie, one the truth, and she knew which would hold in court. That evening, Robert Lane's office once again became the ground for strategy. He scanned the neurologist's report, his eyes narrowing with satisfaction. This is exactly what we need. When, not if, Dylan tries to claim incompetence, we'll have clinical proof ready. No judge will question it. Elaine clasped her hands on the desk. He thinks he can discredit me by attacking my mind, but the mind is the very thing he underestimated. Robert leaned back in his chair, folding the report neatly into a file. Consider this. Another wall built into your estate plan. Let him come with petition. Every attempt will collapse under its own weight. Linda, perched in the chair by the window, crossed her legs with a sharp snap of her heel. The boy thinks insults are weapons. He doesn't realize paperwork cuts sharper than any blade. Elaine looked past them both, out at the city lights flickering against the darkening desert. Dylan's face hovered in her mind, not the boy she once held in her arms, but the man who had called her garbage. Her resolve hardened like cooling steel. Let him try, she said softly. The tests prove what I already knew. My brain will bury him. The letter had gone out on Monday morning, delivered by certified mail, crisp in tone and impossible to misinterpret. It stated simply that Dylan Carter was no longer listed as power of attorney for Elaine Carter's estate. The authority now rested solely with Elaine herself, with Robert Lane as legal executor in the event of her incapacity. By Tuesday afternoon, Dylan came storming up the walkway like a man already condemned. His footsteps were loud, deliberate, each one punctuated by the scrape of sneakers against concrete. He didn't knock. He didn't even pause. The door banged open, slamming into the wall as he thundered inside. Elaine was in the kitchen, quietly slicing peaches into a porcelain bowl. Maya sat at the table, her laptop open, textbooks spread around her like a fortress. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, ordinary, peaceful, until Dylan's voice shattered it. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, waving the letter like a battle flag. His face was blotched red, veins standing at his neck. Elaine looked up slowly, knife still in hand, her expression composed. "It appears to be a notice." "You cut me out!" Dylan shouted, slamming the paper onto the table so hard Maya's pen rolled across the surface. "Power of attorney, gone! Who gave you that idea? Who put this in your head? I did, Elaine replied simply, her tone as calm as if she were correcting an entry in a ledger. Maya reached for her phone beneath the edge of her notebook, thumb sliding across the screen. The small red light blinked quietly as she began recording. You can't just do that. Dylan's voice cracked into a roar. He jabbed his finger toward her, shaking with fury. I'm your grandson. I've been managing things for you. Elaine cut him off gently, setting the knife down with care. Respect is earned, Dylan. Not demanded, not stolen. The words struck harder than any raised voice. Dylan faltered, his mouth open, but no rebuttal came. His eyes flicked to Maya, noticing the phone too late. You're recording me? His tone turned venomous. You little snake. Maya didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, stronger than her trembling hands. The world deserves to know how you treat her. Dylan lunged forward, but Elaine stepped between, them with a quiet authority that froze him mid-motion. She didn't raise her hands, didn't shout. She only stood, her gaze level, unyielding. This house will not host your tantrum, she said. For a moment, the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Then Dylan slammed his fist against the table, rattling the porcelain bowl, peaches sliding onto the wood. His breath came in ragged bursts, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, but no less dangerous. You'll regret this. You think you're clever? You think you're untouchable. But you're not. You're old, you're slipping, and everyone knows it. The court will see it too. You'll need me before long, and when you do, I'll be holding the reins. Elaine only tilted her head, her silence sharper than any insult. Dylan snatched the letter back, crumpled it in his fist, and stormed out, the door slamming behind him so hard the frame rattled. The sound lingered long after his footsteps faded. For a moment, the kitchen was still again. Maya's phone remained recording, catching the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of her own unsteady breathing. Linda appeared in the doorway, having heard the chaos from the porch. She arched an eyebrow, smirking despite the tension. Perfect evidence, she said. He just gift-wrapped his temper for the judge. Elaine sat back down, adjusting her glasses, her expression unshaken. He believes anger is power. He doesn't understand its proof. That evening, Robert Lane leaned back in his office chair, listening carefully as Maya replayed the recording. Dylan's voice roared through the small speaker, entitled, threatening, dripping with contempt. Robert's jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed with something close to satisfaction. This, he said, folding his hands, is exactly what I expected. Guardianship attempt incoming. He'll petition for control of your estate within weeks. Elaine met his gaze across the desk, her spine straight. Then let him. Every attack he makes will only carve his own coffin. Robert closed the folder with a quiet snap. The petition will be filed, and when it is, we'll be ready. Elaine stood, her binder tucked firmly under her arm, her voice low but resolute. He thinks my mind is weak. He has no idea what it looks like when I sharpen it. The courtroom was cool and severe, its walls paneled in dark oak, its ceiling lights humming faintly like an unseen jury. Elaine Carter sat at the respondent's table in a tailored navy suit, her posture impeccable. She looked more like a retired executive than a frail widow. Beside her, Robert Lane arranged his files in tidy stacks, his silver pen lined up square to the edge of his legal pad. Across the aisle, Dylan slouched at the petitioner's table, flanked by a young attorney who seemed too nervous to meet Elaine's eyes. Dylan wore a sharp blazer, but his shirt was untucked, his posture careless, as though he believed arrogant could carry a courtroom the way it carried his parties. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise!" The Honorable Judge McCarthy presiding. The judge entered, robe flowing, his lined face etched with the look of a man who had lost patience decades ago and never bothered to find it again. He settled into his chair, scanning the docket with his reading glasses perched low on his nose. This matter concerns a petition for guardianship, he announced. Mr. Dylan Carter alleges his grandmother, Mrs. Elaine Carter, is no longer competent to manage her estate. Counsel may proceed. Dylan's lawyer rose uncertainly, fumbling with his papers. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Carter is experiencing cognitive decline. She has made irrational financial choices, severed family ties, and is vulnerable to manipulation. Dylan stood, seizing the moment. She forgets things constantly, he declared, his voice rising with practiced outrage. She gets confused, misplaces bills, loses track of conversation. I'm just trying to protect her from herself. She doesn't know what she's doing anymore. Elaine didn't flinch. Her face was serene, almost amused, as though she were watching a child perform poorly in a play. Robert Lane rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. His voice, calm and clipped, carried with surgical precision. Your Honor, we anticipated this maneuver. That is why Mrs. Carter underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation administered by an independent neurologist 2 weeks ago. I have the certified results here. He handed the file to the clerk, who delivered it to Judge McCarthy. The judge flipped through the pages, his brows lifting slightly as he scanned the charts and scores. Robert continued, his tone smooth. Mrs. Carter performed not merely adequately, but exceptionally. Memory, reasoning, executive function, all intact. In fact, her results exceed the average for her age group. The record speaks for itself. Judge McCarthy's eyes cut to Dylan, unimpressed. Mr. Carter, this doesn't bode well for your claims. Dylan's face flushed, but he pushed forward. She's manipulating the test. She's putting on a show. You don't know how bad it gets at home. Robert raised a hand slightly, a conductor guiding the moment. If I may, Your Honor, Maya Carter, Mrs. Carter's granddaughter, is present to testify regarding that home environment. The judge nodded. Proceed. Maya stood from the front bench, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the small recorder she carried. She walked to the stand, was sworn in, and sat with her chin lifted, her voice soft but clear. I live with my grandmother. I see how she's treated. Dylan calls her names, mocking, cruel. He said her brain was garbage at dinner. He screamed at her when she wouldn't give him money. I recorded it. She pressed play. Dylan's voice filled the courtroom, booming, vicious. You'll regret this. You're old. You're slipping. And everyone knows it. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge's jaw tightened, his expression settling into disgust. That will do, he said, raising a hand. Dylan sputtered. She set me up. They're twisting everything. Sit down, Mr. Carter. Judge McCarthy snapped, his gavel striking once, sharp as a rifle shot. Silence fell. The judge removed his glasses, his voice low and final. Petition denied. Mrs. Carter is fully competent. This court will not be used as a weapon for spoiled heirs. Attempt another frivolous filing, and you'll answer for contempt. Dylan collapsed into his chair, his mouth working silently, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. Elaine allowed herself the faintest smile, a flicker at the corner of her mouth, gone almost before it appeared. She gathered her binder, rose with composure, and walked from the courtroom without a word. Robert leaned toward her as they exited. One battle down, more to come. Elaine's eyes glinted in the afternoon light streaming through the courthouse doors. Good. Let him keep fighting. Every strike he makes falls on his own head. Robert Lane's office smelled faintly of old leather and lemon polish, the kind of scent that clung to seriousness. Elaine sat in the high-backed chair across from his desk, her binder resting on her lap, hands folded calmly over it. Robert's desk was covered in documents, loan records, copies of signatures, bank correspondence, all spread out like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. Robert tapped one page with his pen, his jaw tight. This, he said, isn't your handwriting. Elaine leaned forward. The document was a car loan application dated 18 months ago, issued from a dealership downtown. The signature at the bottom was meant to be hers, but she knew her own hand as well as she knew her reflection, and this was not it. The loop on the E was too wide. The cross on the T slanted wrong. Even the pressure of the ink told the story of a younger, heavier hand. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. Dylan. Robert nodded. The bank flagged irregularities when the payments began defaulting. I requested full documentation. The dealership provided this copy. Forensic analysis wasn't even necessary. The forgery is obvious. Maya sat near the window, her knees tucked up under her chin, staring at the page as though it were evidence in a crime drama. He forged your name. For a car? Her voice was quiet but sharp with disbelief. Robert's expression was grave. A luxury SUV. Fully loaded. Sticker price near $70,000. The account is thousands in arrears, and because your name is attached, Mrs. Carter, the creditors would naturally assume liability rests with you. For the first time, Maya's anger overrode her disbelief. He's ruining himself. No one has to stop him. He's doing it all on his own. Elaine closed the binder in her lap with a soft snap. Her face was unreadable, her voice measured. Which is why we don't interfere. We document. Linda, who had swept into the office just in time to hear the exchange, leaned her elbows on the edge of Robert's desk. Keep every receipt, she said firmly. Every payment record, every notice. The boy thinks paperwork is just paper. He doesn't realize it's a guillotine. Robert slid another folder across the desk, his silver pen resting on top of it. I've already filed an initial fraud complaint with the county. The bank is eager to cooperate. They don't like being made fools of. Judge McCarthy has agreed to hear preliminary motions within the month. Maya exhaled, her eyes wide. So it's really happening? He could face charges? Robert's gaze sharpened. Forgery of this kind is a felony, add financial fraud, and the penalties become severe. The hearing will determine whether the evidence moves forward to trial. Elaine did not speak right away. Her eyes lingered on the false signature, the mockery of her name scrawled across the bottom of the page. She thought of the hours she had spent teaching Dylan to hold a pencil properly, the lined notebooks where he practiced his letters, the way he had once smiled proudly when he signed his own name on a spelling test. Now he used her name as a weapon. She inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, and looked at Robert. Set the hearing. Let the record speak. Robert inclined his head, making a note in his ledger. It will be on the docket within days. Maya glanced between them, her voice tinged with awe. He keeps calling you garbage, but every step he takes proves the opposite. Grandma, you're sharper than ever. Elaine turned her eyes to the window, where the desert sun burned across the Phoenix skyline. She didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the set of her jaw. Linda straightened, adjusting her blazer, her voice edged with that dry humor that always seemed to land sharper than scolding. He thought he could sign away your future with a pen. Instead, he signed away his own. The room fell into a purposeful silence, heavy with strategy and certainty. At that very moment, across town, Dylan leaned against the hood of the very SUV in question, laughing with friends, bragging about the deal he had scored. His words slurred with beer, his confidence swollen with ignorance. But in Robert Lane's office, the trap was already closing. The paperwork was filed, the court date was set, and Judge McCarthy, stern, unyielding, unimpressed with spoiled heirs, was waiting. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, a mix of desert grit and bureaucracy. Elaine walked the marble hallway with her binder clutched to her chest, Maya at her side. Robert Lane kept pace, his measured stride steady, his leather briefcase clicking softly with each swing. Linda followed close behind, her sharp gaze sweeping over the rows of benches and milling lawyers like a general assessing a battlefield. When their case was called, they stepped into the chamber. Judge McCarthy presided again, his robe as unwrinkled and his expression as unsympathetic as ever. He adjusted his glasses and looked over the petition. Protective order sought against Dylan Carter. Grounds, harassment, threats, and intimidation. Robert rose, voice calm but cutting. Your Honor, the petitioners are prepared with audio evidence. The respondent repeatedly shouted at Mrs. Carter, threatened her, and attempted to physically intimidate both her and her granddaughter. Maya, seated stiffly, lifted her phone. The small red light blinked as she pressed play. Dylan's voice filled the room, raw, venomous, impossible to misinterpret. You'll regret this. You're old. You're slipping. And everyone knows it. I'll be holding the reins. The words echoed off the paneled walls, the menace behind them undeniable. Elaine sat unmoving, her eyes forward, as though she were carved from stone. Judge McCarthy raised a hand. That's enough. His gaze cut to Robert. Do you have more evidence? Robert inclined his head. We do, but I believe the recording speaks for itself. The judge's eyes hardened as he turned toward Dylan, who sat at the respondent's table, his arms crossed, his smirk faltering under the weight of his own voice. Mr. Carter, do you dispute this recording? Dylan shifted, bluster rising. She set me up. They baited me. They... Answer the question, the judge snapped. For once, Dylan's mouth closed without words. The gavel struck once. Protective order granted. Effective immediately. Mr. Carter, You are prohibited from contacting or approaching Mrs. Carter and Miss Maya Carter in any capacity. Violation will result in arrest. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Lawyers whispered. Clerks exchanged knowing glances. Dylan's face flamed red as the weight of the order settled on him. Not just the legal constraint, but the humiliation of being branded dangerous in open court. Maya exhaled shakily, gripping her grandmother's hand under the table. Her voice was low, but firm enough for Elaine and Robert to hear. He called you garbage. Now the law calls him danger. Elaine turned her hand, squeezing Maya's in return, her voice a steady whisper. Justice is patient. Across the aisle, Dylan erupted. He shoved back his chair, the screech loud against the polished floor. This is a joke. She's manipulating all of you. She's old, she's bitter, and you're letting her ruin me. His attorney tugged at his sleeve, hissing for him to sit, but Dylan's fury had already spilled over. Judge McCarthy's glare silenced the chamber. One more outburst, Mr. Carter, and I will hold you in contempt. Sit down. Dylan slumped into his chair, his fists clenched, eyes burning holes into the table as whispers swelled through the gallery. His reputation, already cracked, was shattering in real time, shards scattering across the city with every murmured retelling. When the hearing adjourned, Elaine rose with her usual grace. She gathered her binder, smoothed her blazer, and walked down the aisle with Maya and Robert beside her. The crowd parted slightly, eyes following her, not with pity, but with respect. Linda lingered a step behind, her stride easy, her smirk unmistakable. She leaned close to Elaine as they stepped into the sunlit hallway, her voice a dry drawl. Protective orders may expire on paper, but humiliation like that? Permanent. Elaine didn't reply, but the corners of her mouth twitched, the faintest shadow of a smile as the desert light washed over her face. Behind them, Dylan stormed out a side door, his voice carrying through the corridor as he barked into his phone, already trying to spin his downfall into someone else's fault. But for Elaine, the fight was no longer about noise. It was about the record. Ink, rulings, signature, each one more binding than the last. And the record was turning against him. It started with a whisper and spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, Elaine's quiet neighborhood in Phoenix was buzzing with the kind of story no one could resist. A spoiled grandson mocking his grandmother's garbage brain and then being crushed in court. The recording Maya had captured found its way online, first shared discreetly among her classmates, then reposted on social media feeds, and soon stitched into reaction videos by strangers across the country. Headlines screamed across digital platforms. Spoiled heir calls grandma garbage, loses everything. Entitled Grandson Humiliated in Court After Threats Go Viral. Clips of Dylan's tirade looped endlessly, his red face and venomous words replayed against captions, commentary, and memes. Within days, his name was synonymous with disgrace. Employers whispered, his landlord raised an eyebrow, and even his friends distanced themselves, their laughter edged with unease when his face appeared on their screens. Dylan himself raged in private, hurling his phone at a wall after yet another clip surfaced, with tens of thousands of views. They don't know me. They don't know what she's like, he shouted, but the walls of his apartment offered no sympathy. His carefully curated image of wealth and entitlement had cracked wide open, and the world was staring at the rot beneath. Elaine, meanwhile, sat in her garden beneath the shade of her Palo Verde tree, trimming roses with slow precision. Maya sat cross-legged beside her on the patio, phone in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting on her worried face. They're all talking about it, Grandma, she said softly. Everyone sees the truth now. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Elaine paused, clippers resting lightly in her. She glanced toward her granddaughter, her expression calm, almost serene. The truth doesn't need volume, Maya. It only needs time, and time has always been my ally. Maya smiled faintly, reassured not by the words themselves, but by the steel behind them. Later that afternoon, Elaine and Robert Lane met in his office once again. The mahogany shelves and desert light spilling through tall windows felt less like a legal space now, and more like a command center. Robert leafed through documents with the quiet efficiency of a man used to building walls no one could tear down. Public opinion is with you, he said, tapping a news article printout, but it won't shield you from his next move. Dylan's pride is bruised, and pride drives desperate men. Are you ready for the next step? Elaine set her binder on the table, her voice as crisp as her navy blazer. I already took it. Robert's brow furrowed. Meaning? Elaine slid a folder across the desk. Inside was the deed to her desert home, signed and recorded with the county registrar 2 weeks earlier. Maya's name gleamed at the top, with Elaine's life estate carefully preserved in legal ink. I transferred the property, Elaine said evenly. It belongs to Maya now. I will live there for as long as I please, but when I am gone, the house is hers. Dylan can file all the petitions he wants. The ground itself is already beyond his reach. Robert's eyes widened slightly, not with disapproval, but with admiration. You moved before the storm even hit. Elaine adjusted her glasses, her tone unshaken. Anticipation is what separates accountants from gamblers. Dylan gambles. I prepare Linda, perched in the corner with her ever-present notepad, let out a low whistle. You didn't just shut the door, Elaine. You bricked it up, sealed it with concrete, and planted roses in front of it. For the first time that day, Elaine's lips curved in something close to a smile. Garbage doesn't inherit. Maya does. The room fell quiet for a moment, heavy with the weight of what had been set in motion. Across town, Dylan sat slumped on his leather couch, his phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. He swiped through comments. Spoiled brat. Karma in real time. Grandma deserves better. Each one like a needle piercing what was left of his pride. When he saw the headline about the property transfer, his heart slammed against his ribs. Granddaughter secures home in surprise transfer, cutting brother out. The walls seemed to close in on him. For the first time, he realized the fight wasn't slipping from his hands. It was already gone. The Maricopa County Recorder's office was nothing glamorous. Rows of beige filing cabinets, the hum of fluorescent lights, clerks in collared shirts moving with practiced disinterest. But to Elaine, it was the stage of a triumph decades in the making. Behind the counter, the clerk stamped the deed with a heavy thud, the ink spreading into crisp, undeniable letters. The page bore Maya's name now, bold and permanent, while a neat clause preserved Elaine's right to remain in the home for the rest of her life. The clerk slid the papers back across the counter. Deed recorded, Mrs. Carter. Effective immediately. Elaine nodded once, tucking the documents into her binder with the same deliberate care she used to balance accounts. Thank you. Maya hovered at her side, hardly daring to breathe. So, it's really mine? Already? Elaine turned, studying her granddaughter's wide eyes. Ours, she corrected gently. I keep the life estate. But when I'm gone, there will be no debates, no loopholes. It is yours. Maya swallowed hard, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know what to say. Linda smirked from the chair behind them, her notepad balanced on her lap. Try starting with thank you and work your way up from there. This isn't pocket change. It's a fortress built in your name. The three women left the office together, the Arizona sun glaring down on the courthouse steps. Elaine paused briefly, her blazer catching the heat, but her face remained composed. She knew Dylan would learn of the transfer soon enough. Anticipation was as much a part of strategy as the move itself. She didn't have to wait long. That evening, just as the cicadas began their chorus, Dylan's car screeched into the driveway, dust and gravel scattering in angry plumes. The slam of his door echoed like a gunshot. He stormed up the walkway, waving a printout of the recorded deed he'd clearly pulled from the county website. You can't do this, he shouted, voice already breaking with rage. This house is mine. It was supposed to be mine. Elaine stood calmly on the porch, hands folded at her waist, her silver hair gleaming in the fading sun. She spoke as if addressing an auditor who had overlooked a glaring mistake. Done already? Dylan's chest heaved, the paper crumpling in his fist. I'll fight it. I'll drag you and Maya into court until you're broke. You can't just erase me from the family. Maya stepped forward then, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted higher than Elaine had ever seen. She didn't hide behind her grandmother this time. Her voice rang out clear and steady. This is mine now. Legally, permanently, and without question. You don't scare me anymore. For a moment, Dylan faltered. The girl he used to dismiss as timid, the one who worked 2 jobs in quiet obscurity, now stood before him like a wall he couldn't break. His face twisted, fury colliding with disbelief. Linda appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her smirk sharp as a blade. Blood isn't ownership, Dylan. Ink is. And the ink says you're out. The neighbors had begun to gather. Mrs. Callahan across the street, two teenage boys with phones raised, the hum of whispered commentary spreading through the cul-de-sac. Dylan's tantrum wasn't private anymore. It was a spectacle. He looked from face to face, desperate for sympathy, but found only judgment staring back. His voice cracked into something raw, almost childlike. "She's turning you all against me. She's poisoning the family." Elaine finally descended the porch steps, her heels crisp against the concrete. She stopped in front of her grandson, close enough for him to see the calm resolve in her eyes. "You poisoned yourself, Dylan. All I did was write it down." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Dylan crumpled the paper completely, shoving it into his pocket as if destroying the proof could undo it. His hands shook, his breathing ragged, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried more desperation than authority. "This isn't over." Elaine looked past him toward the horizon, her voice steady. "It already is." The cicadas droned louder, the last light fading, as if the desert itself was closing a chapter. But the story, everyone sensed, was far from finished. The Superior Court of Maricopa County was packed that morning, the benches lined with curious onlookers and weary clerks who had already learned to recognize Dylan Carter's name. His tantrums had bled into the public record, his reputation now a spectacle people followed like theater. Elaine entered with quiet grace, her binder clutched to her chest, her navy suit pressed and sharp. Maya walked beside her, chin high, though her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag. Robert Lane strode at their side, his measured calm turning heads with the kind of authority that needed no introduction. Linda trailed behind, notepad in hand, eyes gleaming like she'd paid for front-row seats. At the petitioner's table, Dylan slouched forward, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot from a night spent rehearsing outrage. His attorney, a more seasoned man this time, hired at painful expense, whispered urgently in his ear, but Dylan shook him off, determined to make the performance his own. The bailiff's call rang out. "All rise." The Honorable Judge McCarthy presiding. The judge settled into his chair, adjusting his glasses with the same unsparing severity that had reduced grown men to silence in seconds. "This matter concerns allegations of undue influence regarding the transfer of property belonging to Mrs. Elaine Carter." His eyes lifted, pinning Dylan with a gaze that cut like a blade. "Petitioner may proceed." Dylan stood, his voice pitched loud enough for the gallery. "Your Honor, my grandmother has been manipulated. My sister Maya pressured her, tricked her, made her sign away the house. She preyed on an old woman's weakness to steal what should rightfully pass to me. It's fraud, plain and simple." He spread his arms wide, his dramatics almost theatrical. "I am the rightful heir. She's twisted everything." The courtroom murmured, a low rustle of disbelief. Elaine didn't move. Her stillness was more powerful than Dylan's bluster. Robert rose with deliberate calm, buttoning his jacket as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the petitioner accuses without evidence, but we anticipated this. Exhibit A, video documentation of the deed transfer, filmed on the very day it was executed." He gestured toward the clerk, who connected a laptop to the screen. A crisp recording filled the courtroom. Elaine seated at Robert's desk, glasses perched neatly, voice firm as she read aloud the terms of the deed. She signed with steady hands, then looked straight into the camera. "This transfer is my choice. No one is forcing me." The silence in the chamber was profound. Even Dylan's attorney shifted uncomfortably, as though the ground had been yanked from beneath his client. Judge McCarthy turned his gaze back to Dylan. "Do you dispute this recording?" Dylan's face flushed crimson. "Of course I do. It's staged. They rehearsed it. She doesn't even know what she was signing." Robert's voice sliced through the noise. "Your Honor, Maya Carter is present and prepared to testify regarding her grandmother's wishes." The judge nodded. "Bring her forward." Maya rose, her steps careful but steady. She was sworn in, then seated at the witness stand. Her voice was soft, but her words carried a quiet conviction. "My grandmother made this choice herself. She told me for months she wanted to protect her estate, to keep it safe from being squandered. I didn't ask her to do this. I didn't force her. She wanted to ensure her legacy went where it would be honored." Her hands tightened in her lap, but her eyes remained on the judge. "He called her brain garbage. He treated her like a burden. She gave me the house because I stood by her when he didn't." The gallery stirred again. sympathy flowing toward the young woman who spoke not like a schemer, but like someone who had simply borne witness to cruelty. Dylan shot up from his chair, voice breaking. She's lying. She's always been jealous, always wanted more. Sit down, Mr. Carter, Judge McCarthy snapped, his gavel striking once. The sound echoed, sharp as a gunshot. Your theatrics do not serve you here. The judge leaned back, removing his glasses, his voice heavy with finality. This court finds no evidence of undue influence. The deed transfer stands. Petition dismissed. The words landed like stones. Dylan slumped back, his face pale, his fists clenching around air. Elaine gathered her binder, her expression serene. She rose with dignity, pausing only to glance at her grandson. Her voice, calm but sharp enough to cut through his collapse, carried across the aisle. You wasted your chance, Dylan, and you'll never get it back. The courtroom doors swung open as she stepped out, sunlight spilling into the hall like a benediction. Behind her, Dylan sat frozen, a man watching his imagined empire turn to ash. And in Elaine's eyes, as she crossed into the desert light, the war was no longer a battle of property. It was the war for memory itself, and she was winning. The knock came late, after sunset, when the desert heat had finally eased and cicadas buzzed lazily in the mesquite tree. Elaine had been sitting in her armchair with a book open on her lap, the hum of the ceiling fan steady overhead, when the sound rattled her door. 3 sharp knocks, urgent, unpracticed. She knew before she rose who it was. Through the glass pane, Dylan stood on the porch. His hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked, his eyes hollow from nights without sleep. The arrogance that once clung to him like cologne was gone. Desperation had stripped it bare. Elaine opened the door but did not step aside. The warm glow from her lamp spilled out, cutting across his figure, illuminating the sweat on his brow. Grandma, he said, voice cracking. Please. He sank to his knees right there on the welcome mat, the thud of bone against wood startling in the quiet night. His hands clasped together, shaking, as though prayer were a muscle he'd never used until this moment. I messed up, he stammered. I said things I shouldn't have, did things I shouldn't have. I was angry, stupid. Please don't cut me out. Don't leave me with nothing. I'm your grandson, your blood. Elaine studied him, her expression unreadable. Her spine remained straight, her hand still on the doorknob, her eyes steady. Behind her, Maya hovered in the hallway, phone already in hand. She lifted it slowly, the red light blinking as it captured every word, every tremor in Dylan's voice. Please, he said again, his voice breaking into a sob. I don't care about the house, the money. Just give me another chance. Don't erase me from your life. I'll change, I promise. For a long time, Elaine did not speak. The cicadas filled the silence, their droning chorus louder than his weeping. Finally, she lowered her gaze to him, her voice low and measured. Forgiveness is free, but legacy isn't. The words struck harder than any gavel. Dylan froze, his lips parting, but no argument came. Tears streaked his face, carving lines of defeat across what remained of his pride. Maya's breath caught. She kept recording, her eyes wide, not with cruelty, but with the quiet awe of someone watching a chapter close, in real time. Elaine's hand tightened on the doorknob. Without another word, she began to close the door. The wood inched shut, narrowing the rectangle of light until it framed Dylan's figure in a slice of gold. Grandma, please, he cried, his voice muffled as the door pressed closer. Don't do this. Don't leave me. But the door clicked shut, the lock sliding into place with a sound that echoed like finality. On the porch, Dylan crumpled forward, pressing his forehead to the wood, his sobs spilling into the night. Neighbors' curtains twitched, a porch light flicked on across the street, but no one stepped in. This was his collapse alone. Inside, Elaine turned away, her face composed but her eyes shining faintly, not with pity, but with the gravity of ending something that had long needed to end. Maya slipped her phone into her pocket, exhaling as though she'd been holding her breath for years. Linda, who had been perched at the kitchen counter with her ever-present notepad, leaned back in her chair and let out a sharp chuckle. Closure looks good on you, she said dryly. Elaine allowed the faintest flicker of a smile, then crossed the room to her armchair. She lowered herself into it with deliberate calm, opening her book again as though the night outside were no more than background noise. On the porch, Dylan's sobs continued, muffled now, broken. The sound of a man left to face the ruins he had built with his own hands. Maya moved to the window, peeking out. Dylan was still on his knees, his face buried in his palms, the desert night pressing down on him with a weight heavier than any judgment. She turned back to her grandmother, her voice soft, almost reverent. "He's gone, Grandma. For real this time." Elaine did not look up from her book. Her voice was calm, but the steel in it had not dulled. "No," she said. "He's only just begun to understand what nothing feels like." The fan hummed overhead. The cicadas sang outside. And on the porch, Dylan stayed in the dirt, crying long after the door was shut. The conference room at Robert Lane's office was hushed, the kind of silence that hummed with consequence. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the long oak table with bands of gold. A thick folder lay open in front of Elaine, its pages waiting for signatures. She sat at the head of the table, her blazer pressed, her glasses catching the light. Beside her, Maya sat straighter than usual, hands folded in her lap, eyes darting nervously between her grandmother and the stack of papers that seemed to pulse with gravity. Linda leaned against the credenza in the corner, notepad balanced on her knee, her smirk already anticipating history. Robert Lane adjusted his glasses, flipping to the first page. His tone was measured, deliberate, like a surgeon explaining the final step of an operation. "This, Mrs. Carter, is the irrevocable trust. Once signed and notarized, its terms cannot be altered by any court. Your assets, properties, investments, accounts transfer into the trust, with your granddaughter designated as sole beneficiary." He looked at Dylan's empty chair across the table, then back to Elaine. "Your grandson will have no claim. Not now. Not ever." Elaine picked up her pen, her hand steady. "That's the point." Maya's lips parted as if to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She blinked hard, struggling against the tide of disbelief. "Grandma, all of it?" Elaine met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "You stood beside me when no one else did. Loyalty deserves permanence." The pen scratched across the paper. Elaine's name again and again, each signature sharp as a strike of a chisel. With every line, she carved Dylan further from her future. When she reached the last page, she paused only long enough to press her palm flat against the paper, as though sealing it with more than ink. Robert gathered the signed pages, sliding them into the folder with a soft finality. "It's airtight," he said. "No petition, no lawsuit, no forged signature can undo this. He's barred legally, permanently." Elaine sat back, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "My brain did this," Linda chuckled, snapping her notary seal into place with a sharp click. The impression stamped deep into the page, a mark that could not be erased. She leaned closer, her voice a dry drawl. "Garbage, huh? Not today." The room exhaled as though something unspoken had lifted. Maya covered her mouth with both hands, tears brimming. She leaned into her grandmother, whispering, "I don't know how to thank you." Elaine squeezed her hand. "Live well. That's thanks enough." Robert cleared his throat. "There is one more matter." He opened a slim second file and slid it forward. "You asked me to draft papers for a charitable trust as well." Maya blinked, startled. "Charitable trust?" Elaine reached for the folder, her fingers brushing the fresh pages. "Money rots if it sits idle. It should build something." Robert tapped the header at the top of the document. "The Elaine Carter Scholarship Fund, an endowment dedicated to supporting women pursuing degrees in accounting and finance, structured to grow with interest, perpetual. The first scholarships can be awarded as early as next fall." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Maya's hand trembled as she lifted the page, scanning the bold title that carried her grandmother's name. Her voice cracked. "A scholarship? In your name?" Elaine nodded, her expression serene but resolute. "They mocked my mind, called it garbage. Let them watch it educate women for generations. That will be my aim." Linda let out a low whistle, shaking her head in admiration. "You turned insults into institutions. That'll sting far worse than cutting him out of a will." Elaine signed the scholarship papers, her pen strokes calm, almost graceful. As Robert sealed the file, The afternoon light shifted across the table, gilding the ink like a crown. For the first time in months, Elaine leaned back and let herself feel the weight of her choices settle, not as burden, but as structure, something solid that would outlast her. Across town, Dylan sat hunched over his phone, scrolling through news stories that mocked him with headlines about inheritance battles and arrogance turned sour. He had no idea that even as he wallowed, the final doors were closing, locking forever behind him. Elaine rose from her chair, smoothing her blazer. She glanced at Maya, whose tears now streamed freely, and at Linda, who grinned like a woman who'd just watched justice carved in stone. Come, Elaine said softly. Let's leave the rest to time. They walked out together into the desert light, the city shimmering on the horizon, and as the door of Robert's office shut behind them, it felt less like an exit and more like the ceiling of a vault, one that Dylan Carter would never open. The television lights were warm, casting a glow across the rows of folding chairs set up in the Phoenix Community Center. A podium stood at the front, draped with a banner that read in bold letters, the Elaine Carter Scholarship Fund, opening doors for women in accounting. Reporters milled in the aisles, adjusting cameras, microphones clipped to their collars. The hum of anticipation filled the room, part ceremony, part story, waiting to be told. Elaine sat in the front row, her navy dress suit crisp, her silver hair arranged neatly. At 74, she looked neither frail nor retiring, but commanding, like someone who had earned her place in this room brick by brick. At her side, Maya leaned forward on her chair, her excitement barely contained, while Linda tapped her pen against her notepad with the smug satisfaction of someone watching a headline write itself. The moderator, a young dean from Arizona State University, stepped to the podium. Today, we honor Elaine Carter, he began, a woman whose decades of work in finance have already touched lives, but who has now chosen to secure opportunities for women who will follow in her footsteps. Her generosity, vision, and resilience have created a scholarship that will change futures. Applause broke out, polite at first, then swelling as cameras flashed. Elaine rose slowly, walked to the podium, and stood behind the microphone. The silence that followed was thick with expectation. Her voice was steady, quiet but carrying. When I began my career as an accountant, women were rare in the field. We were told our minds weren't suited to numbers, that our future belonged in kitchens and not in boardrooms. But I knew my worth, and I refused to let anyone call my work, or my mind, garbage. The word lingered in the air, striking harder than any headline. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes catching on Maya's, who beamed at her with pride. This fund is not about me, Elaine continued. It is about the women who will come after me. They will not beg for respect. They will not wait for permission. They will be accountants, auditors, leaders. They will shape the world with numbers the way I once did. Because legacy isn't money, it's direction. The applause was thunderous now. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the flashbulbs seemed to crown her in white light. Maya wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, her heart swelling so large it felt as though it might burst. For once, she didn't feel like the overlooked granddaughter. She felt like a torchbearer. Linda leaned close to her, voice low, amused. Better ending than any court, huh? Maya nodded, unable to form words, her throat too tight with emotion. Across town, in a dim bar, Dylan Carter nursed a warm beer, his eyes fixed on the television mounted above the counter. The news anchor's voices carried the story he could not escape. Widow builds future for women accountants. Granddaughter to oversee fund after her passing. His own name was absent, erased. To the public, he was already irrelevant. The bartender glanced at him, recognition flickering briefly in his eyes, then dismissed him. Dylan turned away, his jaw tight, but the truth pressed down heavy. He had become a ghost in a story that no longer needed him. Back at the community center, Elaine returned to her seat as the dean announced the first round of recipients who would apply next fall. Maya squeezed her grandmother's hand, whispering, "They'll remember you forever for this." Elaine's gaze stayed on the stage, her expression calm but resolute. "No," she said softly. "They'll remember what I built. My name is just the doorway." The applause rolled on, echoing through the hall, spilling into the night like a tide. As the cameras kept flashing and as Dylan's silence deepened miles away, It was clear. The war was over. Elaine Carter had not only defended her legacy, she had rebuilt it into something untouchable. But deep in the back of her mind, she knew that victories cast shadows. And somewhere, behind his silence, Dylan was still plotting. The condo smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh bread, the kind of meal Elaine had always cooked for others but now savored in her own space. The Phoenix skyline shimmered beyond the balcony windows, city lights scattered like jewels across the desert night. Inside, the dining table gleamed under soft candlelight, three place settings laid with deliberate care. Elaine stood at the stove, lifting the roasting pan with steady hands. She no longer needed to prove she was strong. Strength now radiated in the calm way she moved, the quiet command with which she placed food on the table. Maya rushed from the kitchen doorway, cheeks flushed from laughter. "Let me help, Grandma." She carried the bowl of salad, her grin wide, her eyes alight with something Elaine hadn't seen in years, joy unclouded by worry. Linda was already seated, one leg crossed over the other, swirling the wine in her glass. "If this is what victory tastes like," she said dryly, "I'm going to start a few feuds of my own." Elaine chuckled softly, settling into her chair at the head of the table. The candles flickered, casting warm light over the framed certificate on the sideboard, the official trust document that carried Maya's name. The embossed seal glinted in the glow, not just a record of signatures, but a monument to choice. Dinner unfolded with laughter that came easily now, no longer muffled by tension. Maya told stories about her classes, her professors, the endless nights of studying that were finally beginning to feel like stepping stones instead of obstacles. Linda chimed in with sharp-witted remarks, her humor sharp enough to sting but softened by affection. For the first time in years, Elaine allowed herself to simply listen, to let the warmth of companionship fill the silence that had so often pressed on her in the past. At one point, Maya set her fork down, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "Grandma," she said softly, "you gave me more than inheritance. You gave me strength. Watching you fight, not with shouting, not with cruelty, but with patience and precision, it's changed how I see everything. You showed me that dignity can be the sharpest weapon." Elaine reached across the table, her hand closing over her granddaughter's. Her voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of truth. "Brains build futures, Maya, not insults. Remember that." Linda clinked her glass against hers. "Amen to that. And let me add, brains with a spine are unstoppable." They laughed together, the sound rising into the condo's high ceiling, wrapping the night in a warmth that no insult could diminish. As dessert was cleared, slices of peach tart that Maya had insisted on baking herself, Elaine leaned back in her chair, tea steaming gently in her cup. She sipped slowly, savoring the ritual. The candlelight danced across the polished wood, catching on the framed deed beside the trust certificate. Two simple documents, yet together they represented an empire of resilience. For a long moment, Elaine said nothing. She simply let the scene wash over her. Maya's smile, Linda's sly grin, the steady hum of the city outside. This was what victory felt like. Not the roar of a courtroom, not the sting of revenge, but the quiet certainty that she had shaped her ending on her own terms. The shadows shifted across her face as she lifted her cup once more. Her silver hair gleamed in the soft glow, her posture relaxed, her eyes calm. And when she finally spoke, her words cut with the clarity of a ledger closed, a life accounted for. "He mocked my mind, I left him nothing, and gave her everything." The candle flames wavered, the city lights shimmered, and in that stillness, the final balance sheet of Elaine Carter's life stood complete.